Good morning, everybody. Riley, thank you for leading us this morning. I want to introduce our speaker. Following our speaker, we're going to be led in a closing prayer and then dismissed by Don Milliken, one of our Board of Trustees members, former chair of the Board of Trustees, who lives over in Tulsa and is an elder at the Park Plaza Church of Christ, now known as the Park Church of Christ. I think we're in for a real treat today with our speaker. Our speaker this morning is Ali Master, who is a senior partner with the firm of Ernst and Young. Ali is a serial entrepreneur with a passion for building new services and inclusive teams. He's an immigrant from Pakistan and is the best-selling author of Beyond the Golden Door, Seeing the American Dream Through an Immigrant's Eyes. He's a dad, a husband, a church leader. He's a professional cricketer wannabe and always hopeful Dallas Cowboys fan. Based in Dallas, Ali has been with Ernst and Young since 1995. He leads EY's Workforce Tax Services Group, which includes multiple businesses that he founded for that firm. These include tax credits, Affordable Care Act services, and employment tax advisory services. In this role, Ali has advised some of the largest corporations in the country on HR and tax matters. That's just his day job. At nighttime, he's responsible for leading strategic alliances and acquisitions for part of the worldwide EY tax. He's a graduate of leadership programs from the Kellogg School of Management and Harvard University. He earned his undergrad in accounting from UT Dallas, and he's a CPA in the state of Texas. Ali is a frequent speaker on a wide range of topics that run the gamut from business to faith to inclusion to American liberties. He's recently appeared on Yahoo Finance, the 700 Club, and the Eric Metaxas Show. Please join me in welcoming Ali Master.
Thank you. Well, good morning. We're not going to be talking about accounting today, so you can rest easy. Very excited. This is actually my first time sharing since I wrote a book at a college campus, so thrilled to be here. And that's the topic today in the next 10 minutes that we have of just how did I experience the American dream coming to America on a college campus, not that different than this one. So let's just jump in. A little bit about myself. You know, my dentist loves this picture. That's my family. That's Judy, my wife, and then Isaac, my youngest, Molly, and Noah's at Arkansas, and Emma's going to northern Arizona. We're going to have to find a way to send one here, but the youngest one still has a chance. I grew up in a Muslim country in Pakistan. Most of my 18 years of my life, I was in Pakistan and grew up in a strong Muslim family. And then, of course, I've been at EY. It's great to have Don here in the audience because he was one of the partners that I worked for in my early years at EY. So just a little bit about myself, a little bit more about the book. Hope you'll get a chance to see it. It's at the bookstore, in your bookstore today. But I write about 5 American liberties that I experience and why I think they're so unique and special. And it's really a interesting time in our nation to talk about these liberties because I feel like we're at a crossroads and certain choices will take us one way and other choices will potentially put these liberties at risk. But I talk about the freedom to fail, to find your mate, to find religion, to believe, to build things. And ultimately, what many of you are going to get to do, hopefully all of you, is to vote and to govern yourself. And you know, most of us take these liberties for granted. Well, I don't. When you've lived without freedom and you've experienced that, then you hold on to these far more closely. So one of my goals today is to just sort of remind you, because most of you, just looking at you, probably grew up here, your ancestors grew up here, great-grandparents grew up here, so you may take some of these liberties for granted. What does it feel like to grow in a Muslim society? It's a world of haves and have-nots. So those are my parents up there. Ami and Abu, I call them. And as you can see by the way they're dressed, we were pretty well off. My dad would always pride himself for all these cool bow ties and just goatees, and a very fashionable man. He worked for GE, which was an affiliate of GE in Pakistan. And we had a maid and a chauffeur and a gardener and a cook, and I thought we were quite rich. On the bottom, you can see how most people travel. in Pakistan is not just inside the bus, but on top of the bus. I'm told that the fare is cut in half if you ride on top. And many people do that, hours and hours risking their lives just to come and work for a job that may pay you $1 a day. And that's many of the people that served my family were like that. And then on the right, you see this mosque. You see mosques everywhere. If any of you have been to a Muslim country, it's hard to separate out your life from Islam. You have calls to prayer 5 times a day. There are rules about how you must talk to each other, how much you interact with the opposite sex, how you must eat, how much you fast, how you pray, how you read. Everything is in Arabic, even though I didn't speak Arabic. Most Pakistanis don't know Arabic, but the religion was all, the whole worship was all in Arabic. And so Islam really governed my life for my first 18 years. And there I am. Look at all this hair. It was, I always wonder if someday if I wake up in heaven, will I get the hair back? But I come at the age of 18 as an international foreign student on a campus just like this. And I was walking around this campus, and there's a lot of international students even here. And we have many stereotypes about Americans and Christians. Frankly, they're the same thing to most of the world. If your name is Mark or Luke or John or Elizabeth, it's straight out of the Bible. So why wouldn't you be a Christian? And so I was raised to believe all Americans were Christians, the Bible had been corrupted, that American parents kicked their kids out at 18 to never let them come back home. It's a very selfish society that's just sort of all about just kind of party on the weekends of your paycheck, and that they've lost their way, and Islam is the true faith. So I just came here to go to school, and I had not been prepared for life in American society. I was the only child with all those comforts I just mentioned. And what I didn't know was that my dad wasn't really rich, and that GE just paid for everything. So he had actually traded his pension, his entire life's pension, for 1 year's worth of tuition in an American college. Also, Pakistani parents are not very open. They're very private, so I didn't know that. And so I come here, first semester, and my dad tells me, well, son, you're on your own. I only got 1 year. So you go from riding in almost like what we had, a limo, to sweeping floors at McDonald's in the very first month. And you just go through this huge culture shock. In one moment you think you're rich, now you're poor. One moment you think you're tall, dark, and handsome, now you're only dark. And you're now diverse. And it's very challenging. And I was not prepared for that, probably not even prepared to, as most students are. And so my first semester, there was no room in University of Texas in the men's dorm, so me and 10 guys in the girls' dorm. And I'm like, you can only imagine. It went south from there. And I had a hard time making grades that my parents were expecting. And there was all this pressure to perform as a student. And things were just going south fast for me. And my first girlfriend that I met, and I thought she would go to church on Sundays, but then Monday through Saturday, there would be drugs and just other behavior that I would never attribute to a Christian. And I'm like, what's going on here? And she wouldn't even let me study, and grades started to fall. I got fired from McDonald's, which is not an easy task, but I just got fired. And I actually ended up in a hospital with a slashed wrist, just thinking this is not the American college experience that I had expected. And at this point, I get another job, and I start to sort of pick myself up from the ground. And we don't have time to cover all of my colossal failures, but I saw America as a place where you can fail and start over. And I talk a lot about the freedom to fail. And then this favorite 2 words in the Bible, but God, happen. And I run into this girl. Often there is a girl that fixes things. And so her name is Judy, and I went and found another job at another McDonald's. And this is the first time I meet someone who is 19, she is a sophomore, but she's really living her life for Jesus. And I remember she would clean the restaurant at the end of her shift, and even though she's off, I'm like, why are you doing that? She goes, well, I'm just doing this for God. And it was I'd never seen a young person focused on their faith like that. And I was like, yeah, she's probably like weird. And so I met her parents and her friends. They all had the same problem. They were like all God-fearing and integrous, and she gave me my first Bible in English because I had never, again, I never read God's Word. And Muslims study in Arabic. They're told to study in Arabic, but only a small smidgen of the Muslim world actually speaks Arabic. So the Quran, the book that Muslims follow, have all these stories about Abraham and Joseph, and some are right, some are wrong, but I never really read in English God's Word, and that really started to impact me. But I also like Judy, and I wanted to ask her out, so I kept asking her out, and she wanted to get rid of me. So she thought, maybe I could invite him to church. And so she invited me to church, and I said yes. And I ended up going to church. And I just remember, just like this morning, seeing you guys worship. It was a very different experience. And that started to draw me to Christ. And all these things that I had been taught about Jesus started to sort of dispel. And I had a really hard time proving that the Bible was wrong, like I had been raised. And I just studied his word. And started to get drawn to him. At some point, Judy's friend called her up and said, hey, you're like starting to like date a Muslim, and that's not really a good idea. And we sort of broke up and went our separate ways. Probably one of the best things that happened to me so that I could be on my own. So I took 2 weeks off, read the entire book of Romans. And some point during those 2 weeks, 6 to 9 months after being introduced to Jesus, I accepted Christ. And at that point, everything starts to change. My language starts to change. My habits change. All my family in Texas starts to think I'm crazy, and they tell me to go back home, which I do. So I go back home to face my parents and my family because when you discover this amazing treasure, you can't just keep it to yourself. And so I felt like I needed to go back home. That was probably the hardest 2 months of my entire life. But also, that was a time I've been closest to God because that's where he really met me in Pakistan. For the first time, you're not around the safe environment of Texas where everybody thinks it's great and you have potlucks at churches. You're like actually around a country where 99% of the people think differently than you. But God also made himself real to me. My parents did not agree at that time with me. They sent me to a psychiatric ward. A lot happened that you should read the book to find out about how God made himself real. I came back, and Judy actually realized that I had become a true believer. We got married. Of course, you can't exactly feed a family on a salary of McDonald's. So then I started to develop a passion for entrepreneurship and started my own business, which failed miserably. One thing led to another, eventually went to Ernst and Young, and I just remember wanting to build things at EY. It's an amazing firm that lets you actually do that, lets you have a chance to fail, and eventually things started to work out, and I made partner 8 years later. It's a great country where you can like bring your ideas forward and just try to build things. And where else are you going to get that chance? And that's really why there's a line in not just Pakistan, but most countries wanting to come here. I could go on. There's things in the book about 9/11 and my experience being someone from a Muslim country, but now a follower of Jesus, how that all worked out. But it drove passions in me to want to become a U.S. citizen. So in 2002, I became a citizen. I want to just leave you with 3 thoughts as we close. One is just, you may think you're here to study engineering or biology or nursing, but God may have a different plan. So be on the lookout for what is it that he has for you. And then, that's my cue, let Jesus shine. Judy was not an expert in Islam at all. She was just sort of living her life and being an integrous person and crediting it to God. You never know how God can use a young person like you in the lives of someone like me. And then lastly, just these freedoms, don't take them for granted. They are very, very special. And until you experience a lack of them, sometimes you don't realize it, but treasure them and live them out.